1 week season.
OWS fam, the nation, my dudes and dudettes. We are back with another industry experts as part of the Best Ball Plus subscription for the one and only 1 week season. We are going to do something that we did earlier in the summer and bring in another one of the primary contributors for 1 week season today. And we're going to talk. I like doing this because I am so heavily focused on theory and on underdog. And Mr. Michael Johnson, you know him as M Johnson 86, is going to join me very shortly. I love talking with him because he is running the show and doing a lot of stuff that is, quite frankly, not being done anywhere else as it pertains to drafters and DraftKings. So without further ado, we'll bring him in. Mikey, how we doing tonight, man? Mute. The old mute.
Hey, well,
What's up?
Good start there. I'm off to a hot start.
It bites us all, man.
I'm doing great. Good to be back. Back on chatting with you. Obviously, we're both, churning out the content weekly, and we're in contact on our own. But like actually getting to strike up the convos and talk about things together is a nice change of pace.
Heck yeah, dude. Also, scrolling down there, sign up at Drafters using code OWS for 100% first time deposit match bonus up to $100. So we're talking about the $2 they got over there. We're talking about the $15. That's a good amount of entries in these primary contests over there. So if you're not yet a member of Drafters, get on over there, use code OWS. And I actually use this for the first time this season. I got the first deposit bonus as well. So getting those free entries is always good. Like I talked about in the intro, dude, you are our primary drafters and DraftKings guy. We just talked about the $2, the $15 that they got over there on drafters. Let's spend a quick moment and talk about kind of the landscape outside of Underdog, because we see a lot of content on Underdog, but we don't see a ton for drafters, for DraftKings, for some of these other sites. Talk to me about like what it means that the $2 filled already and they launched a new one. What does that mean for like the $2? And correct me if I'm wrong, they made it bigger, this $2, right?
Yeah.
So
they made it bigger. It was the original was a 100K prize pool, 56,000 entries. This one is 125K prize pool. So first prize is 25K for this one. It was only 20 for the first one. Otherwise, the structure is pretty similar. I think it's like the top. I think it's right at like 16.7% or whatever of total entries get paid, I think, for all their contests. So basically, like in your DraftKings or Underdog, your top 2 out of 12 advance, same sort of deal there. Like it's, the same percentage wise are going to get paid. The difference is their big one, the $15 one last year, it had a bunch of overlay. This year, I think it'll probably have some overlay, and I think they probably knew that when they opened it, but who knows, like with the momentum they're kind of getting. I think the $2, I think it was really sharp of them to put out the $2 contest. I think for casual people trying to get in and dip their toes in the water, I think that two things. One, it eliminates the whole playoff luck. Like clockwork, every year, week 15 and 16, Twitter erupts with people just like irate that their team that dominated for 14 weeks goes busto. And so I think there's some appeal there. So the cumulative format is good. So I think that combination of things is good. And then hopefully, having that lowest price point contest in the industry brings a lot of people in, because they're sharp dudes over there, and they're really, they're trying to, do something different and add to the industry. And, as we know, like in DFS, like the more options the consumers have, the better it is across the board.
Yeah, heck yeah. And not to mention over at Drafters, we're going to plug Drafters again real quick because you're the Drafters guy, dude. And before we continue this discussion, like I say you're the Drafters guy, literally Mike is putting out like top tier content for Drafters, for DraftKings. And quite frankly, I will call it the best that I have seen around the industry. So shouts to you, brother. That is clutch. Not to mention, they're handing out free money in the $15 contest as well in the form of entries, plus a $100 bonus at the end of this draft cycle if you max that bad boy. So we're looking at the schedule fee. I'm looking at it right here. After your first 10 entries in the $15, you get a free entry. After 25, you get another free entry. After 50, you get 2 free entries. After 100, you get 3 free entries. So now we're sitting at 7 free entries if you get to 100. And oh, by the way, if you max it out, you're getting $100 bonus cash back. So, dude, we talk about EV all the time.
Yeah.
Something to boost your EV, that equation is taking free money when it's given. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, and that's like kind of the equation, and that the math of it comes down to, although if you max it with the $100 bonus cash and all the entries, it's $205 worth of value,
Yeah.
and then if you haven't played on there before, you're going to get the $100 deposit match, so you're at $305. Already, they had their June promotion. They gave out another. If you did 10 entries in June, you got a free ticket. So anyone who's just doing those 3 things, you're saving $320 to start. It's $22.50 to max it. So you've basically taken out all the rake, and there's likely to be overlay on top of that. So between all that, and then a lot of the things I've been sharing with our subs, just from an approach standpoint, it's really a pretty high upside, and it can be a relatively low risk proposition, which those are the types of asymmetric bets we like to make, right?
Let's go, man. Fewer stuff has to go right if you're getting free money to begin with. So, always a boost to EV. Quick shout again. I will throw this up again real quick. Head on over to Drafters, use code OWS for first time depositors, and get a free $100 match bonus on your first deposit. So, that is awesome. We have talked a lot, or you have done a lot of work in talking positional tiers, and you call them silos, with which to build or construct a roster on a cumulative scoring contest, like drafters. I don't want you to give away everything because what you're doing is awesome. But talk to me a little bit about the work that you've done this season to kind of crack the code of these cumulative scoring contests.
Yeah, so the biggest thing is that we are so inundated with Best Ball Mania stuff and DraftKings and Underdog. Like, that's where everyone focuses. And even drafters with their $2.5 million tournament, across the whole scale of the best ball industry, their total prize pool, the total percentage that they're accounting for is relatively small. So usually, you follow the money. So that's these other places where there's more total money at stake is where most of the content is going. And it's where most of the focus for people goes. Well, then they come along to a site like Drafters, and there's just a lot of, the copy paste of trying to just use the same formula and move over. And, it's hard to break those thought processes that, you're working really hard to try to, I mean, these best ball playoff contests, like, it's quite a code that you're trying to crack. And like,
Yeah.
that's where the game theory stuff and everything you're talking about, like you talk about, like, we don't have an infinite time sample, but like, what can we control? How from a game theory standpoint, can we give ourselves the best opportunity, to be exploitative, to find those deviations that are going to help us. And that's still in a lot of ways, some of those things apply to drafters, but just how you build those teams and how people are so geared towards end of season stuff, how they're so geared towards, a 1 week being able to have like a massive spike week at a given time. It's just very different on drafters. And the positional silos you're talking about, just, the way I think about it is your positions. So your quarterbacks, for example, as opposed to thinking of it on a weekly basis of like, okay, can I get spike weeks as many times as possible? It's kind of optimizing how you are getting the most out of the points that your roster scores. I guess I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
So as opposed to, there are ways that we can optimize and build where we're not having these lineups and these weeks where one guy scores 28 points and you got 25 points sitting on your bench, because that's kind of a wasted thing. So like I'm best ball. So I'm big into golf. So like best ball is like a format in golf where you and your partner play and you take the best score. And that's kind of a thing there is like usually the teams who do the best are they ham and egg it. So like the hole where I blow up and make a triple bogey, you made a birdie, and then the next hole you made a double and I made a par. Well, the other team, they both parred both holes. Well, they did better than us overall, but we outscored them. So
Yeah.
same sort of thing, kind of optimizing for the cumulative, and isolating those positions and thinking about, the quarterback position from a season long standpoint, as opposed to, looking at the weekly scores on a horizontal axis.
Beautiful. We're not going to get into too much more than that, but I wanted to give a quick highlight of some of the work that you're doing over there for those cumulative scoring contests. With that said, we're at this kind of, we'll call it a lull in the off season, in the draft cycle, where we haven't had a lot of news recently. The ADP movements are slowing down. The amount of information that has been released around the NFL has been fairly stagnant since we got the schedule released, really. So we're in like month 2.5 of this kind of the meta of what the draft, what ADP has looked like. That is all about to change. We talked about it, and we're not going to again give the behind the scenes stuff, but we talked about where we have been, where we are now, and where we're going in 2.5 weeks when camps open, as far as the influx of information that we're going to get and all the changes that are going to happen with that. So I hammered that this week on Wednesday's behind the scenes Best Ball Plus. So, but I want to talk real quickly about kind of what to expect as we get this influx of information that is about to happen once camp starts opening. So with that said, like we have 2.5 weeks for this kind of the comfiness of where ADP is now, where we are right now. How are you handling these like next 2.5 weeks from a mindset perspective before we get into that news? And then we'll cover how the mindset kind of shifts once we get there.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing is to be able to take reports, or when things come in, or there people are paid to put out news, so they're going to put out news whether it's actually news or not.
Yes.
So being able to kind of read through things like what is actually like actionable and what is actually potentially true, and what actually even matters. Like,
Mhm.
you look at JJ McCarthy and Drake May, like these two rookie quarterbacks. Like, yeah, of course, like their coaches are going to say, yeah, they're not the starter right now. They're probably not going to start the season. We have no idea how true or how close to being true that is. Like, I think Darnold and Brissett are fine guys, but like if May and McCarthy, if either of them look relatively competent and ready in the preseason, like how do you not throw them out there? So I think it's just things like that, being able to, drafter like on drafters, those guys are falling to like the 19th, 20th rounds because people, cumulative scoring, but they're not gonna start for X many weeks, which maybe that's true, but like right now you're paying for as if that isn't true, and or as if it is true, and if it's not true, then that's where you talk about like the closing line value, that sort of thing.
Yeah, 100%. And we're also like, there is definite merit to taking those gambles now. The other side of that coin that you see thrown around a lot is kind of waiting for that news to happen. But when I talk about where we have been, where we are now, and where we're going, that is as much about the type of rosters that you can build as it is strict ADP. And if you think about like, I'll give a quick example, and hopefully this sparks kind of a discussion that we can have. But again, I don't want to give too much away.
Mhm.
We'll use a quick example, and I used this example for OWS Best Ball Plus members. Say, for example, Christian Watson gets nothing but good news. I mean, his praise is rung. Looks spry in camp. And this is a guy that we know has had significant hamstring issues over the previous 2 seasons. So, say we get all these good reports in 2.5 weeks. Christian Watson is the man. He is the alpha wide receiver. Like, yes, Jaden Reed is dope, but he's playing a complementary role. We don't expect his snap rate to be anything higher than 65%, a standard like slot snap type rate. Romeo Dobbs is the established X-type wide receiver, and everything's kind of pointing to like this idea that the expectation from Green Bay is that like Jaden Reed is kind of the slot guy, and yeah, they're going to bring in Dontavian Wicks as well, but it's like in 2 wide receiver sets, we don't expect Romeo Dobbs or Christian Watson to leave the field. Say that happens, like what does that mean for the ADP of Jaden Reed, of Christian Watson, of Romeo Dobbs? Well, we're likely going to see movement, right? We're likely going to see, and again, this is hypothetical, just an example to talk through and think through. Say that happens. We see Jaden Reed, who is a 6th, 7th rounder. We see Christian Watson, who is an 8th, 9th rounder, potentially flip. We also see Romeo Dobbs, who's an 11th, 12th rounder, start moving up. What does that mean for those players in the rosters that we can build? That's what we'll call layer 1 of thinking through this. There's also the like associated factor of what does that mean for Jordan Love, who currently is an 8th, 9th rounder? How does that affect him if Jaden Reed kind of trickles down in ADP and we see Christian Watson skyrocket, like leap 2 rounds in ADP effectively overnight? How does that affect Jordan Love? Well, he's probably going to be moving up a half a round or a little bit in ADP as that happens. Then that's like layer 2 of thinking through this. And again, this is just one like hypothetical example. And there's going to be so many of these that happen, but I think it's a good process. Third layer of that is we're talking specifically about Jordan Love in this hypothetical situation. He's likely to move up half a round, maybe. What does that mean for like the other quarterbacks that are being drafted around him currently? What does that mean for Joe Burrow? What does that mean for Dak Prescott? What does that mean, that pocket of quarterbacks? If a guy like Dak Prescott, who there's not a whole lot of room for him to move up in ADP because the difference between his wide receiver 1 and CeeDee Lamb, who's going 2nd overall, and Dak Prescott's ADP is so wide that it's hard to influence that. But these quarterbacks like in Green Bay, where they're very close, they could be affected by the guys around them. What does that mean for like not Jordan Love in that like pocket of ADP? So now like that's one hypothetical, and we've gone like 3 layers deep into like what could happen with that. Now multiply that by 50 or like all the reports that are going to be coming out, and ADP is just about to get shot out the window. So like that is all not meant to say like we have to prepare for all those things, all those hypotheticals, because they're borderline infinite. We can't really do that, but like thinking about that stuff now over the next 2.5 weeks will influence our decision-making process when we're on the clock 3 weeks from now and we're faced with, do I click Christian Watson again in this example? Do I click Christian Watson's name in the 7th round when he's been going at the 8-9 turn? And what does that mean for the rest of my roster? How can I differentiate this now from the 33% of rosters that have already been drafted in the BBM, for example, or any of these other contests? So that's like, again, hypothetical, but this is an interesting thought exercise, I think, when we're moving forward into a time where we're about to be inundated with all this information. So that being said, like, how are you viewing this transitionary period where I've dubbed it, we're leaving draft window 1 and entering draft window 2? How does your mindset get affected by all the movement that we're about to see?
So my approach, obviously, my main focus is on drafters, and then I also
Yeah.
play a significant amount on DraftKings. I do some Underdog, some other contests. I'll usually throw like 10 or 15 slow drafts in, like when they have a puppy or something. Like
Yeah.
towards the end of it, I'll snapshot it and that way, get some value there. All our subscribers know what I'm talking about. But like, I think like for me, the approach is I like to work my way backwards from the back, like forwards. So what I mean by that is like the end of the draft and kind of how can I optimize those picks and make it most likely that, especially on drafters, where it's 20 rounds and it is cumulative for the season. But even for DraftKings, because like a lot of the stuff I talk about on DraftKings is like because it's so similar with 20 roster spots with full PPR scoring, like there's a lot of things you can do to really up your advance rate. And I think that starting from the back and finding the best ways that you can use those end of draft picks in an optimal way for the contest you're in, to make it where you're not just taking zeros, to make it where like these guys are contributing to your roster, and kind of understanding what you can and should be doing there, who will be available, etc., how they can help your team, and then how does that team get built prior to that, to where those guys then are helping you. Kind of again, like what I was talking about before, like maximizing the points, the output that you get for the points that those 20 players actually scored. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I think that there, like you said, so much is going to change. We're going to find out so much information in that first 2 weeks just by who's running with who. This guy that's coming back off injury, like he's not even on the field. Like I know you and John talked about like Chubb and Hawkinson. Like I think those two guys, like their status is those first 2 weeks. Like, are they running like full team drills, everything but getting hit? Like, or are they just off on the side? Like that, they could change 5 or 6 rounds in a week. Like, so those types of things just, but at the same time being conscious of, I think sometimes it's easy to like load up a team with, if this guy comes back healthy and this guy comes back healthy and he gets the starting job, and then this running back, his starter like hurts his hamstring, like you can go too far where it's like, this is like, when my buddy that sends me the 15 team parlay or whatever on
check this shit out.
Hey, this will hit. I'm like, no.
But it can. No, just kidding.
It could.
Just kidding. Man. You also talked about. I lost my train of thought now that you've made me laugh with the parlay thing. I forgot where I was going with it. Anyway, we'll continue talking about.
I've got more jokes. I'll bring more jokes too. I'll keep you laughing.
Damn you, Scuba Steve. Oh man. It'll probably come to me in a little bit. The next thing that I kind of want to talk about is we have this contest that was just released. I say just, but like 2.5 weeks ago, on Underdog. That is a cumulative point scoring format. It is a $15 buy-in. It mirrors kind of the contest that is the primary contest over on Drafters, with the big difference being that we have 18 rounds, and it is 0.5 PPR instead of full PPR. Are your exploration or the fundamentals that you're exploring as far as cumulative scoring on Drafters, do those apply to that style contest, or is it something that is completely different because we're talking about 18 versus 20 rounds, we're talking about half PPR?
Yeah, so there are some similarities, but a lot of the things that I have talked about in my Drafters training, and that I'm actually like, I'm in the process of putting it all together, all my notes and everything, like so into like basically a draft guide for drafters. But the more I look at the Underdog thing and the more I've had time to kind of digest it and like look at it and think about it, like most of my stuff is like mathematically based on historical things, based on top 10, top 100 teams the last 2 years in the contest, based on like ADP finishes versus like where players were drafted versus how they finished at their position. I broke down like top 20 wide receivers over the last 5 years. Where were they drafted? That sort of thing. And it's the math changes so much. It changes completely when you take away those 2 rounds, those 2 roster spots, and when you change from full PPR to half PPR. So there are a lot of things that are really similar, but I think it'd be a mistake to just like I have a couple of very specific things like that I have been telling our subs, like our kind of musts about how they approach drafters drafts, and like really like to give yourself a chance at, a high finish, some certain things you need to do or avoid doing. And there's a couple things that are just different when it comes to the underdog format. Just those 2 rounds are huge.
Yeah, for sure. I since that underdog is kind of my realm, as far as pumping out content and talking about it. I just thought it would be interesting to kind of hear from a little bit of both of us. Again, we're not going to dip too much into what you got going on for drafters, and we're not going to talk too much about what is going on behind the scenes as far as my analysis of what is optimal in that contest. But there were 2 things that you brought up that I think are rather interesting, and one had to do with the late rounds and late round targets. Last season, we saw like a 14th rounder, a 15th rounder, a 16th rounder, a 17th rounder, and an 18th rounder, like legitimate 5 to 6 guys develop into borderline must-haves, particularly as far as cumulative scoring goes. I mean, and I'm not even talking only like the Kyron Williams, the Puka Nakuas. I'm talking like I mean, even in Baltimore,
Yeah.
the tight end situation with Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely, Isaiah Likely became a guy that was spotted all over the top of these cumulative scoring contests. As far as that, or I guess beyond that being such an extreme outlier where we had legitimately like 5 to 6 late round guys, do you think that is influencing people's decision making processes this year as kind of this like hangover or recency bias factor? Like, oh, I can make up, I can just like not be optimal in the first 7 rounds because I can just make it up. Like they did it last year. It's chill. Do you think, have you seen anything or have you thought anything about like that we might have this somewhat recency bias effect, we'll say, creeping in from
Yeah.
what happened last season?
I think we are seeing it, and I think even more so we will see it to a significant amount in once camp opens and through the preseason. Because I think that last year, you look at some of these situations, there was some buzz around Sam Laporta. There was some buzz around like Puka Nakua. Like I know JM tweeted out like him running the routes and stuff.
Yeah.
He was talking about Tank Dell too. Not as many people were on Tank Dell, but Kyron Williams, there was like some rumors kind of around Kyron Williams. And I think that I think we're going to see more volatility in ADP, and where when reports like that come out, it's going to be where like people are chasing him up the board. Like
Yeah.
it's like a race to like, oh, I got to take him. And so you're going to see these guys like shift 3, 4, 5 rounds like quickly on some news. I think we're likely to see some overreactions. I also think that there has been and will be a lot of people who are building teams in ways that they kind of are expecting or hoping that they get bailed out at the end of the draft by some of those
Yeah.
guys. So I think that every year there are those situations, but you also look at like just those guys I talked about. You look at Puka and Kyron and Laporta, like that was those were such unique situations in that the Rams, like how concentrated they like to be,
Yeah.
and that like those 2 became like not only were the reports right, then also like the guys that they were kind of behind like absolutely got dusted and were like awful, and they were a good offense, and it was a concentrated situation. Like there's a lot of things in there where if 1 or 2 of those things doesn't happen, they're just like okay, like pretty good picks got a little value. Same with Laporta. Like yeah, there's a lot of reports and stuff there, but then they ended up like a top 5 offense. So I think there's a good chance that this year those 5 or 6 people that those reports like really kind of hit, if they're in less efficient offenses, if they're in more, I guess, more balanced type offenses where they don't get as much condensed work, it might not, it's not going to carry teams to the same extent potentially.
The secondary aspect of that discussion is like dissecting what those players were entering the season. Like, yeah, there was a lot of like uncertainty with Sam Laporta, rookie tight end coming into the league. How much is he going to be involved with Amon-Ra St. Brown there? How much overlap of their their routes going to be? And then you look at like the Rams, where it's like Kyron was this like fifth, sixth rounder, I forget exactly when. And there were guys ahead of him in camp. And then you look at Puka, it's like Cooper Kupp's there. He's just a year removed from, achieving the triple crown and receiving, leading the league in like targets and catches and yards. You like break down like what was working for those players, and it's like, oh yeah, like they're on top offenses, they're on offenses that are expected to be concentrated. And it's like this like, aha, oh yeah, maybe that's what I should be targeting coming into this year. So with that, like not jumping too far into that, there were three like big coaching changes this off season that I think fit kind of that similar mold. One of them, Zach Robinson in Atlanta. We already know he's part of the Gary Kubiak extended coaching tree. We like that. There was Kellen Moore, who now goes to his third team in 3 years, but we know kind of what his offense is, and we like it for fantasy purposes. Obviously, Kellen Moore now in Philadelphia. And then third one, I think, is still kind of being more or less slept on, and that's Brian Callahan going to Tennessee. Are there any other situations where it's like, hey, I want to be betting on this situation as far as team goes, and I'm not going to pretend to know like what is going to happen during the season, but I want to bet on that team?
Yeah, I think the ones you mentioned are, pretty spot on. And the other one that I kind of find myself on a lot is the Browns. I think that Cleveland, they weren't pretty last year, and then when they were pretty, it was with Flacco, and it's easy to hate on Deshaun Watson for a variety of reasons. But you know, let's not kid ourselves. Like, he has done it, and like, I mean, I don't even think he's 30 years old. He's like 28, 29 years old. Um, and he has that sort of skill set. And you look at, they've got a great offensive line. You know that Stefanski, right? Yeah.
Yeah, head coach.
Is his running game is always going to be solid regardless of who's back there. And Chubb, if Chubb's healthy, then it's even more so. And you look at the receiving core, obviously Amari Cooper, we know about him, but then you've got Jerry Jeudy, who disappointed in Denver, but like, we've all been talking smack about Denver's offense and how they've done these last 3 years. So like, is it really all about, is it, and they signed him to an extension, and then Elijah Moore, former second round pick, who, most people in the fantasy community and like the draft community were very high on his talent. So like, I mean, and then Njoku, I didn't even talk about him, how he exploded down the stretch last year. They're a team that like nothing's changed from like a organizational standpoint. Like, they still have the same franchise quarterback. They still have the same coaching staff, but like, they're being treated, I think, at like the lower end of their outcomes right now.
Yeah, 100%. That's a good shout, man. And then there's a lot of off-season changes as far as coaching goes that kind of go the other way. Any of these changes that you're kind of like, we'll do this one as a transitionary. Cliff Kingsbury going as the offensive coordinator in Washington. Is he or is he like a let's get excited about this situation?
So he is a guy that I think, and I think you see this a lot in the NFL. There's a difference between being a coordinator and being a head coach.
Yeah.
And I think that Kingsbury,
Dan Quinn, his head coach. Sorry to interrupt. Dan Quinn, talking about Washington. Dan Quinn has kind of showed that.
But I think Kingsbury, like the horizontal raid in Arizona and how that all was like, how that all went down. And he kind of built it that way with all these like tiny receivers and this tiny quarterback. And like, I don't know, it was just weird. It was like how it went down. Like, other than like when they had Hopkins, they were really good for that one year, but otherwise, like, it never really came together. And like, it's easy to like hate on the guy because we like all remember being like, yeah, I'm gonna play these guys in DFS, like they should smash this week, and then just watching these 2-yard outs and
Yeah.
throwing shit at my computer. But it's real easy to hate on it. But like Jaden Daniels is like, he's pretty good, or he looks pretty good. And I think you've got McLaurin, you got Jahan Dotson, who's a former first round pick. Their backfield, they got Robinson and Eckler, some weapons there. So I think and they got CMC's brother, so just like LeBron bringing his son in, we got to have the nepotism. No, I think he's actually pretty good, but they've got not Bron's son. I think Luke McCaffrey.
Yeah. Let's be real here.
No, but I think it's easy for them to be. I guess I would say if we didn't have, I'll say it this way: if the fantasy industry as a whole didn't have such a negative view of Cliff Kingsbury from the Arizona experience, I think the way we are viewing Washington and they're being talked about would be significantly different. And like even Kingsbury, like I don't think that like we should judge him based on arguably like the worst like that we've seen. Like, I mean, he shouldn't have been picking Andy Isabella and running him out there 70% of snaps or whatever.
Yeah.
The other one that is similar, sorry if I'm going
No,
too
let's go.
here, but is the Chargers. And what the Chargers right now remind me of is last year with the Cowboys. Now, I don't think that they're going to turn into last year's Cowboys. But what I mean by that is last year in the offseason, Mike McCarthy was singing, about how they're going to establish the run. That's, Kellen Moore's gone. We're going to live. That's going to be our identity. We're going to live behind it. And they kind of tried to do that for a little bit. And then they came out of their week 7 bye and like, it was just like all bets are off and they just let her rip. And the Chargers, the reason I think about that is Greg Roman's there. We know he likes to run it. Harbaugh is, with Michigan, they run it 40 times a game. And maybe they do that, but they're being approached as if they're going to. You look at Justin Herbert was a 5th round pick last year. And now he's going in like the 12th round on drafters and DraftKings, maybe a little earlier on DraftKings. But like, what if like these people, like at the end of the day, they could say they want to do this, that, or the other, but they want to win the football games.
They want to keep their job too.
Yeah. So like at the end of the day, like, no, I don't necessarily think that they're automatically going to run it 45 times a game. And I think that if like giving your young franchise quarterback, like, I think that it's just a situation that's similar to it reminds me of the Cowboys and that everyone was so convinced they were just going to pound the rock last year. And those sound bites don't mean much when it comes to October.
Yeah. I like that shout a good bit. And I didn't start coming around on Herbert until I think I was drafting with Scott Barrett. And Scott was like, hey, this is like a physical freak dude. He hasn't run up to this point of his career, but like, what if he had some like rushing, like designed running plays? I mean, like comparing him like in jest to Josh Allen. Like Josh Allen wasn't like this crazy rushing quarterback, and then he kind of became that. I don't know. That kind of was eye-opening to me. I think the final offense that we should talk about real quick before we move on is Dave Canales in Carolina. And Dave Canales has kind of proven to be this like RB / quarterback whisperer. I mean, he worked with Geno Smith in Seattle during his breakout. Then he came over and worked with Baker in his like career resurgence / breakout. Now he goes to work with a 2nd-year quarterback who did not look good in his rookie season. Is this something where we expect Carolina? I mean, and the pieces they added with Deontay Johnson and with through the draft with
Xavier
Jonathan
Legette.
Brooks,
Yeah.
and Xavier Legette. Is this one of those situations where it's like we can maybe buy into who their play caller is a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's multiple things, right? It's Bryce Young. I don't think he's ever going to be like a world beater. I thought he was a mistake at number 1 when he was drafted, not just
Yeah,
when but I also think he's a lot better than what he showed last year.
yeah,
And I think ultimately what it'll come down to is like, is this like where Adam Gase like destroyed Sam Darnold as a human being? Like, is Bryce Young, like, is he, you know what I mean? Like, is he seeing ghosts out
yeah,
there? Everybody, that Monday night game against the Patriots, when
yeah,
the sideline audio cut Darnold saying, like, I'm seeing ghosts out there. Like, and hopefully they made the change quick enough. And, it's more like a Trevor Lawrence type under Urban Meyer, that train wreck his rookie season. And then he came
yeah.
back really good his sophomore year.
That's a
Um,
sitcom. I like that.
yeah, I think Young can be solid. I think they've got a lot better pieces around them. I think last year there was too much name recognition for their guys. With like, we knew Miles Sanders, we knew Adam Thielen, we knew DJ Chark. So like, we recognized the names, but then when
Yeah,
you go out and like writing the NFL Edge stuff for them,
yeah,
like, when you go out and you look at it and you're like, well, who's the guy that like the defense is worried about here that like opens things up for everybody else? And it's like, no one.
no,
And now you have like Deontay Johnson is great at getting separation, should
hmm
create easy throws. Xavier Legette is like, he's actually what Jonathan Mingo like was allegedly was, like really good after the catch, like this like physical type guy. I think the pieces just are going to fit a little bit better, and the field be a little bit more open for him, which for someone that's like my size, and I am not a large human, like Bryce Young, it probably some more space is going to be a good thing.
oh yeah, yeah. We're just making a job of talking about these short quarterbacks, man. Mentioning Kyler earlier. If you're not familiar with 1 week season, or if you are familiar with 1 week season, you know kind of our stance on Kyler Murray. So we won't get into that. But the other side of the like changes this offseason, we saw more than I can remember in recent history. Changes at defensive coordinator. I mean, you look down the list of changes that are taking place this year at defensive coordinator, they are plentiful. We talk about like what that means, and you and I wrote the team previews and digging into not only the offensive side of the ball but the defensive side of the ball, what that means, how that integrates to kind of what the identity of this team is going to be. Good Lord, man, we've got some defensive coordinator changes this year. Like you look at the list of like tenured defensive coordinators, and yes, like defensive coordinators can get head coaching jobs. We saw that this season. We saw that kind of last year. Antonio Pierce picked up, Gerard Mayo coming from the defensive side of the ball, Dan Quinn coming from the defensive side of the ball, Mike McDonald. But it kind of strikes me that like the longest tenured defensive coordinator right now is 5 years. That's kind of striking. I mean, we got Steve Spagnuolo, who's been in Kansas City for 5 years. You have Lou Anarumo, who's been in Cincinnati for 5 years, and that's it. Like every other coordinator in the league outside of Aaron Glenn is entering their third or fewer season in their position as defensive coordinator. So talk about like changes and what to expect. Are you thinking about those things and like what they mean as far as like what are the identities of these teams coming into the season?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think obviously, like you and I writing the NFL Edge every week, we talk about that game flow and
Yeah.
how the offense and defense, how things fit together kind of schematically and for an organization. And yeah, I think that absolutely does make a difference. To your point, what you talked about, like you were saying that stat, it's like wild to hear, like that, no defensive coordinator has been over 5 years, but then like thinking about it in a minute, I'm like, well, the guys who are really good probably either get,
Get head
coached
coaching.
or get a head
Yeah.
job. And the guys who are not so good, like, get axed in like 2 or 3 years. But I think it's interesting, like, before you talked about like the Packers example with
Yeah.
like the potential changes. So they're a team with a new defensive coordinator. I live in
Mhm.
Wisconsin, so like my buddies, everybody like talks about like the Packers. Well, for years, like everyone hated Dom Capers. They wanted him fired.
Yeah.
Like he sucks. Yada yada. It's his fault. It's not Rodgers' fault. It couldn't be Rodgers' fault.
Mhm.
But then now he's gone. Well, then Joe Barry comes in, and
It's his fault too.
it's his fault, and he wasn't great, right? Like, but
Yeah.
he like you looked at the last 2 years. This is what I would say to the people who were like, "Oh, fire Barry," is like, well, he really got it together at the end of the year for both of those seasons. Like his last 5 years or 5 games or 7 games in 2022, they ended up missing by they lost to the Lions on that Sunday night game.
Yeah.
But like they held their last like 6 or 7 opponents below 20 points or to 20 points or less. Like they only gave up 20 to the Lions, and you have this like MVP caliber quarterback. Like you should probably like it's probably not the defensive coordinator's fault. Even last year, like they waxed the Cowboys. They could have beat the 49ers.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really defensive lapses. Anyways, I could go on and on about that. His kind of thing is that he always played too conservative, is what everyone said. But also the way that that fit with how Matt LaFleur calls games, they milk the play clock.
Mhm.
They're very slow, methodical offense that kind of like likes to pick and choose their spots. Well, like be careful what you wish for is what I've been telling my friends who are huge Packer fans. I'm very like agnostic. I don't have a team. Is you get a more aggressive defensive coordinator, and now like maybe you can't stay with the run as long. Maybe like you're going to be forced to be more aggressive offensively because like being aggressive, there's not you don't just automatically get sacks. Like you're going to give up some plays too.
Yeah.
So like the Packers are a team that I'm pretty high on. And I think that ambiguity, especially in the receiving core, is kind of keeping their ADPs low. But like they're a team that I think could have a lot more explosive games that they're a part of this year than we've seen in the past, because you make that change in good, bad, or indifferent. As far from a win-loss perspective, like it's you're throwing some lighter fluid on how they're going to approach it. And some of the snooze fests you would see some Packers games be probably you're not sitting back and just controlling things anymore.
The other side of that equation, that's a dope shout for the Packers and a reason to be more hyped than I think the industry already is on that offense. The other side of that equation is we kind of saw a couple of defensive coordinators that were surprise releases.
Mhm.
The immediate one that jumps out to me was Vic Fangio,
Mhm.
getting the axe in Miami and then going going jumping ship to the NFC to another potential Super Bowl contender in Philadelphia. With the changes that an offense like Philadelphia has had, I mean, we saw um, their skill position players have been largely consistent, but now we see Jason Kelsey's no longer with the team. We've seen this team continue to invest in the linebacking core and their secondary up front, the front four. And now they get who I had regarded as probably one of the top 5, 6, maybe defensive coordinators in the league. How does that affect like this identity of a team where we're drafting 3 of their players in the top 3 rounds?
Yeah, it changes it for sure, and I think that's where like the recency bias thing comes into effect with the Eagles just completely falling on their face to end last year and just like
Yeah.
laying an egg in Tampa. And so like everyone thinks of it that way, but you think of how they were rolling prior to that. And it was part of the offense, but also very similar to the Packers situation. How is the team built? They're
Mhm.
built to play with a lead. And they're built not to, and they were really struggling last year. The Fangio situation, I did see that. So apparently it was like a family thing. He wanted to move, like he must have family in the Northeast. So he
Yeah.
asked to leave Miami. It was like a mutual thing.
Mhm.
But then, fell right into Philly's lap as if they need any other good fortune.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like if you solidify that defense, if they're a lot stronger and like tighten things up, well, now all of a sudden you've probably got something closer to that team you saw the first 10 weeks.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of there's a lot of, I mean, they're still being drafted relatively high, but um, I think people are kind of down on them in general. And I think the casual or the regular fan or, evaluator is probably not giving that enough credence. And I think that's a perfect shout for you because that's the type of thing that that changes that whole division, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. Are there any other spots on the defensive side of the ball that kind of influence how we're thinking about teams? And we'll end with that because we're coming up on an hour already.
Off the top of my
Yeah,
head,
putting you on putting you on the spot here.
yeah. Honestly, I've got to refresh myself on the I think the Falcons are one that I don't know who well, is Morris just like running the defense basically?
Yeah, they brought in Jimmy Lake, but I would assume that Morris is going to have his hand in that pretty significantly. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, they're one that just in general, I think that you remove the Arthur Smith elephant from the room and like a lot of things can be different on both sides of the ball. Similar to what I talked about with the LaFleur, the Packers situation with the aggressiveness. Who knows? Like maybe that defense, maybe the Atlanta defense was more conservative last year because of how Arthur Smith wanted to play offense, and
Yeah.
maybe Morris can be a little more aggressive or can switch things up that way. And again, from a team that had such a high rush rate, played at a relatively slow tempo, I believe. All of a sudden, with all their talent, you could be playing in some high volume, high scoring games. And that's kind of the sweet spot, right?
Yeah, I think the one that I'll give a shout to, I think, is in Dallas. We have Dan Quinn, who was a kind of a menace type defensive coordinator, trying to generate disruption. I mean, they had a player that set the NFL record just 2 years ago for interceptions in a season, or was that last year? I can't even remember. That was 2 years ago, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, it
because
was 2 years ago.
Diggs got hurt last year.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that's right, that's right. And now they replace Dan Quinn goes obviously to be the head coach in Washington, and they replace him with a defensive kind of borderline genius in Mike Zimmer. I mean, he's been a defensive coordinator before at the NFL level. He had a really long run as head coach in Minnesota. And that is a team that we, as you alluded to earlier, in after their week 7 bye last season, they were kind of coming out firing because that's just the identity that that team kind of adopted. Now with Mike Zimmer, who's much more of a like tactician, we'll say, on the defensive side of the ball, he still is able to throw that aggression if he needs to, but it's a lot less in your face and taking chances as a guy like Dan Quinn. Could that affect kind of what we've seen from Mike McCarthy's offense there in Dallas?
yeah, for sure. I mean, I would assume that in that week 7 bye for the Cowboys, that was part of the like we're not getting the stops we need. Like we need to like proactively be scoring more points, which most teams should probably just be doing
Do
anyways.
from the start, yeah.
But yeah, from that standpoint, like, do you see it kind of revert back a little bit, or because yeah, Zimmer is like he's not going to give you anything easy, right? He's
Yeah.
going to make you like work for it. Whereas Quinn was
March the
like,
field, yeah.
we've got like these physical specimens, these athletes, and we're going to be aggressive and just we're going to bet on our guys being better than yours. And frankly, that's kind of why they struggled against like better teams, I think, because when they faced the better teams, like the other team had dudes who could
We
do
can
that.
win in
Who
that
you couldn't
situation,
just
yeah.
overwhelm.
Yeah.
So that's where you get like I remember doing the Cowboys write ups because they always play in the afternoon slate when I would
Yeah.
and it was like the splits were like crazy against like they won like so many games by like 30 points. Like it was insane. Like they're just dusting these teams.
Yeah.
But
Especially at home.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, so I think, there's definitely the potential there for yeah, things just to be walked back a little bit, or them not to need to be quite as aggressive as they ended last season.
Dude, that was awesome. That conversation took us all over the map, but I think like one thing kind of led to the other, and we ended up talking about defensive coordinators, which is hilarious. But that was awesome, dude. We're coming up on an hour. Want to keep these manageable. Intaking content, I think, is best done between a half hour and an hour. So we'll stop it there. But if you have not signed up for Best Ball Plus at 1 week season, and you are interested in peeling back that onion, we'll say, game theory, drafters content, DraftKings content, underdog specialized snapshot contest. We're talking about it all, man. And we are doing 5 of these training sessions a week. So if you want to get access to the real meat and potatoes here, peeling back this theoretical onion, head on over to oneweekseason.com. We just had a price drop. So now the Best Ball Plus package is down to $159, and you will get back access to everything that we've covered, because we did build this this product as a building block approach. And so we are in the thick of the theory now. We are really digging deep. Head on over to oneweekseason.com, click the Best Ball Plus tab, get signed up, and I cannot wait to see you guys hanging out in our Discord. Mike, last thoughts, man.
I think I'm going to do a training session next week on ironing after I had to look at my wrinkled ass shirt for the last hour. I had it in the back of my car we were at the pool today, and I pulled it out. I'm like,
yeah.
I
didn't even notice.
I didn't notice it until I was on screen. I'm like, oh man, and I'm repping the 1 week season too. And
yes, dude.
I
like the orange, the OWS orange too, the cap, man.
Yeah.
Dude, that was great.
I mean, I just think we kind of touched on a lot of the things that we can kind of think through potential situations and think through like how things are going to change and that sort of thing. I think my last thought is just like, there's a lot of things that we feel really confidently in right now. And that when you build a roster, you look at it and you're like, yeah, I like
hell yeah, dude.
This is going to happen. And this is going to, but like, there's so much that's just like, we have no idea about. And there's so many teams that, I talked about it a little bit in my training session this week. Like, there's some things that I think are going to happen that like I'm going to be like dead ass wrong about, like, and that's for anyone who's like doing this and like thinking about it. So like just being like open and being aware of that you're going to be wrong on some things, and kind of using that to optimize your thought process, if that makes sense.
Hell yeah, dude. I dig it. As always, man, keep pumping out, keep doing the good work with content over on Drafters and DraftKings. Until next time, y'all, you know where to find us. We'll see you in the draft lobbies, and I cannot wait to see you at the top of the leaderboards. Peace.
1 week